Hey, this is Greg Graziani from Graziani Reptiles, and you're listening to Herp Herp Hooray.
It says here we should work in teams. I tend to think of myself as a one-man wolf pack.
You are about to enter Information Overload, a worldwide transmission with Herp Herp Hooray's featured Breeder of the Week. Here's your host, Jason Rossi.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Herp Herp Hooray. This is my first show of 2013. I'm your host, Jason Rossi. We're streaming on Stitcher Radio, iTunes, and RossiReptiles.com. I'd really like to thank Sean Bradley for filling in the last 2 weeks. He did an outstanding job, so good of a job I didn't think I had one to come back to. Really, he's like 1,000 times better than I am, so hopefully one day I can be as good as him. So, again, Sean, thank you very much. Got a big announcement. While Sean was filling in, I wasn't on vacation. We were working, but somebody was working even harder. I'd really like to thank David Weimert for helping me put together the Herp Herp Hooray forum. He did an outstanding job on that, and it's a first-class site and second to none, so we'd really appreciate you guys going over there and take a look at it and sign up and register. We're looking for a few good ladies and gents to help mod the forum, so if that sounds something that you'd be interested in, just go on over there and shoot us a message and we'll hook you up. We're beta testing it now. So why don't you go on over there and share some of your knowledge, and it's over on our temp site there on RossiReptiles.com. You'll see the forum link. All right, on with the show. This week's featured breed of the week is considered one of the pioneers and definitely a leader in our industry. Greg Graziani from Graziani Reptiles and Python Hunters is this week's special guest. Greg, welcome to Herp Herp Hooray.
Hey, how you doing? Good to be here.
Awesome, man. Well, we do appreciate you coming out, man. We definitely want to get you back, though. Commit to that to get you on to do a genetic show with us. We really appreciate that.
No problem.
All right, you're a busy guy, man, between the reptiles and the show, so how do you find time for it all?
Every time I finish one project, I think I'm going to have a lot more time, and it seems like two more take the place of that one project. So I just... between the family and the kids and the reptile breeding business, the television series and the conservation efforts that we're involved in, it's just nonstop.
You're definitely a busy guy, man. So how did you get your start in breeding reptiles?
I started keeping reptiles 1976 when I was 7 years old. I just was fascinated by snakes, and I started keeping at that point. And up until the real late 80s, basically early 90s, everything we had was either imported animals or, wild caught stuff, even the corn snakes and king snakes. Very few people actually were doing any breeding at that point. There were some old timers that, were breeding some things or accidentally bred some things. And myself, until I got into breeding Burmese pythons, anything that I produced was pretty much either caught, gravid, or an accident. At that point. But that was, my passion. And, when I started, I can remember my grandfather asking me, how are you going to make a living with reptiles? And at that point, I really didn't know, because there was, just a handful of zookeeper jobs that specialized in reptiles. And, this whole industry didn't even exist when he asked me that question. So I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and so interested in the genetic color and pattern mutations of Burmese pythons that seemed like a no-brainer to me to start working with ball pythons because of the space that these little giant pythons took up. We could do so much more, and we figured maybe have 5-10 tops mutations to work with, and even those could give you almost an infinite number of combinations. I just had no idea of what the ball python industry was going to turn into. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. It was kind of like Mr. Ford in his garage building that first car. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
So was the Pastel Jungle your first morph that put Graziani Reptiles on the map?
That is the big one. I can't take credit for the name. Kevin McCurley and I produced the mutation the same year. I think I beat him by a month or two in actually producing the mutation. And at the time, I called it a Type 2 jungle. About 2 months later, when he produced an identical-looking mutation, I just thought it was really foolish to have two separate names of the same mutation. I thought that would get really confusing. Little did I know how confusing it was going to get with all the names that people were going to come up with hundreds of different mutations. And I went over. I mean, he really nailed it. The pastel jungle was that mutation. And it's funny because a lot of new people that get in, they go, well, what's the difference between a pastel and a pastel jungle or a jungle pastel? And they just don't know the history. And there's so many of these mutations that actually had longer names, like the spider was originally the spider webbed, and the cinnamon was the cinnamon pastel. And a lot of these things just got dropped because we're adding so many combinations that it just got too lengthy. And a lot of people that are new don't realize that's where a lot of these names came from.
Kind of have to make it simple, take it back to just naming things what they are, because it's definitely going to get confusing here in the future.
That's one of the things that I typically do when I post a photograph. There's so many terms that start out meaning one thing and then are kind of slangly used something else. The term super and the term killer when referred to pastels typically means the same thing. But a killer blast and a super blast, are different. One of them is a super pastel pinstripe, and the other one's a super pastel spider pinstripe. And for me, my ID system labels, there's an acronym for every individual mutation, so they line up pretty much dominance first in alphabetical order, followed by recessive genes in alphabetical order. And that allows me to look at these things and know exactly what's in it instead of what crazy name somebody came up with this week for an animal with 5 genes in it.
That's a pretty cool method there. I'm going to have to take notes and try that out. I mean, I'm always trying new things when I hear it, just
right.
You never know what's going to work.
No, like I said, I've been working on this system for a long time. So far, I haven't come into any duplicates because I use a 2 to 3 letter acronym, and it hasn't ended up like some airports that are like XYZ because somebody else already had those acronyms. I haven't gotten to that point yet.
I'm sure you will. But another morph that you guys are working with over there and kind of started it out there, the cinnamon pastel, right?
Yes, that was the second mutation that I proved out here with our bloodline, and there were a lot of similar things going on at the same time. I know Chris and Sheila McQuaid were working with a similar bloodline, and so was Brian Barzak and a few others, and that's where we ended up with the cinnamon pastels out of our line, and then the black pastels out of some of the other lines. And they're like the butter lesser controversy. Are they same thing or are they different? More than likely, they're basically the same complex, and there may be some protein levels that are different, which is one of the theories that I have when we talk about the blue-eyed Lucy complex and the black-eyed Lucy complex and the ivory complex. I think you have basically a whole range of the same mutation, and you have different protein levels, which is giving a different super version or homozygous version of that animal.
Now, the ivory isn't a black-eyed Lucy, or is it considered one?
Initially the ivory was the leucistic that or what Pete Call, I believe, thought he was getting as leucistic turned out to be an ivory. But the ivory is that whole yellow belly complex where you've got the super stripes and the yellow bellies and the highways and the pumas and all that kind of stuff. and they are different from the black-eyed Lucy complex, which is your fires and flame hypos and vanillas and all of that, in that complex. And then on the blue-eyed complex, you've got Mojaves and Russos and Mochas and Lessers and Butters and all of those guys in that complex. And so far, it doesn't appear that any one of those three white complex snakes are crossing over into any of the other. It seems like they're three individual complexes.
Well, I just always wondered, because my ivory, I believe, has black eyes. I was just, why isn't it called a black-eyed Lucy? Just because it doesn't fall in the same allele?
Yeah, I think just initially the snake was called an ivory before the black-eyed Lucy was ever produced. So it had already been labeled, and then the black-eyed leucistic, one of the initial animals was a pure white animal with black eyes, which is, that was some of the arguments about the blue-eyed Lucies and the ivories, is that they weren't pure white, they weren't pied white. And when you look at the black-eyed Lucies, if you get a pure white one, they are just as white as a pied, where the ivory complex is more of a brighter yellow, and then the blue-eyed Lucy complex is more of kind of an off-white, dingy bone color almost. So I think, everybody's looking to distinguish their gene from anything out there that could be kind of similar to it. And with the white producing snakes, we have so many different ways to produce a white snake that people just tried to label them as clearly as possible. And I think on those they've done a pretty good job.
Well, you've also had a first over there producing the pewters, am I correct?
Yes, that was another. That was the most unexpected gene combination. I had predicted. I actually, for the first time this year, produced a cinnamon enchi, and that coloration is exactly what I had pictured when I bred a pastel to a cinnamon. I pictured a fiery orange-brown snake, not something that was pewter gray. And that was when I realized we can speculate as much as we want, but until we produce it, we have no idea what it's going to do.
And that's the fun part about it, I'm guessing, because I'm just waiting for the day that I open up an egg and I don't know what it is, because everybody else is doing it. I just can't wait.
Well, it's definitely a possibility, and when people, I get a lot of new people that say to me, I'm not going to be able to produce anything new. There are so many possibilities that not only do the larger breeders not have the physical space to produce those possibilities, they don't have the mental brain power to think of it. The cool thing is anybody coming into this could produce something the world has never seen simply because they thought of something that nobody else thought to put together. So the possibilities are literally endless.
Well, you're working with another badass gene over there, the leopard gene. Why don't you give the listeners a little history on that?
Yeah, that's my favorite gene right now. I mean, I definitely got to give props to the cinnamon and the pastel, which basically started my whole bloodlines over here. But I can't take credit for originally producing the leopard, but I think I was one of the individuals that realized the potential that it had. I think for quite a few years, Pete had been producing leopards, which he basically was selling as marker pieds, because a leopard really has that low white pied pattern to it. It's just a real aberrant, and it's a very dark animal. And the first pied that I ever I got from Pete Call, and it turned out that it was a leopard pied. Nobody knew what the leopard gene was or any of that. And my first breeding was to a pastel, and my second breeding that same year was to a spider. And the first snake out was a pastel leopard, and the only reason I knew it was a pastel is because I knew what the pairing was, but the pattern was really bizarre, and there were three other, out of this 6-egg clutch, there are actually two other leopard animals in the clutch. And then the second clutch, bred to a spider, produced 2 spider leopards and 2 leopards out of that clutch. And out of the 2 clutches, it worked out to about 50%. So at that point, we'd produced a lot of dominant mutations. So I was pretty confident that it was a dominant mutation, but didn't know where it was going to go from there. There's still quite a bit of work to do because I've been so busy into crossing the leopard into other things that the one question everybody asks me is, are all leopards het for pied? And theoretically, I would say yes, but I haven't taken the time to produce, to prove out my leopard's possible het pied, because all of my original leopard stock came from my leopard pied male, so they're all 100% het pied out of that. But when I start breeding them out to other mutations, I haven't taken all of the het leopards and proven that they're pieds. What I have done so far is I have proven out one homozygous leopard animal, and that is definitely a pied. This year I should prove out 2 more. My theory is that the leopard gene cannot be separated from the pied gene. So if you are working with the leopard trait and both parents carried the leopard gene and you get a pied, theoretically you shouldn't be able to separate those 2. Now, if somebody can produce a homozygous leopard that is not pied, then I'm incorrect with my theory. But I've got 2 more possible homozygous leopard pieds that are breeding this year on top of the original. The original animal has produced over 8 clutches of 100% leopards. So with that, I'm pretty confident that he's a homozygous animal. So stay tuned on that. There's definitely some things going on with it, but it is a very dark, very dominant gene. A lot of people have referred lately to the champagne as being a dead-end gene. It is definitely not a dead-end gene once you throw leopard on top of it. That creates a really wild, aberrant, dark pattern on top of that nice creamy gold on the champagne. And it is an incredible animal. With what the Enchi does to the champagne, our next goal is to throw that champagne leopard to an Enchi and see what that double dose does to the champagne.
Now, being that it was so hard to isolate the leopard gene, like finding it out, like what are some things that you're looking at it and finding on some of the maybe not so aberrant or so easy ones to ID? Like what are some things that you're looking for, some of the key things that stick out for you?
I'll be honest with you, I haven't produced anything that was difficult to ID. I have seen a lot of animals that I would call leopard sibs, but the leopards that I have produced are extremely aberrant. They're not kind of in this halfway with just some pied marker kind of things. Now, we also have not obviously done a dominant series in any of these dominant mutations. So in breeding to wild types or other mutations, that could alter the leopard gene to make it, not jump out as readily at you. There's also some talk of another line that's out there. I don't know where it originated from. But when I looked at the animals, they were different and they had some leopard qualities, but I actually held my animals side by side, and they did not appear to be the same thing. And I have produced a few animals that I consider leopard sibs, that I don't consider leopards, that are slightly aberrant, but some het pieds have that. And I think a lot of people have to be careful with what they're purchasing and get the background on the animal, and maybe some form of guarantee from the breeder, or at least agree, hey, this is what we both think this is at that point. And I think that's one of the things a lot of the sellers need to do, because there's a lot of things we can't 100% verify. So I think you basically need to give the buyer as much information as possible and agree that you both agree that's what this is, so that you're both happy at that point. But understand, in genetics, we're not working with any biochemical information or DNA. We're working with phenotypic expression, which means we're both going to look at it, we know what the parents are, and we're both going to agree this is what we see. And beyond that, we can't guarantee anything else.
Well, I got to ask, man, I was at the Hamburg show. I was standing at Colin Weaver's table, and Oz walks up, and he points at a pied, and he's like, yo, I was just talking to Greg Graziani up in Canada, and he said that the black speckles along the pattern and the black striping, that's a sign of a leopard pied. Any truth to that?
I will tell you, the leopard pieds that I have produced, the original male did not look any different from, I had another pied, they were almost marked identically. If I mixed them up, other than size, my leopard was an older animal, so he was bigger, you could not tell these two animals apart. But now that I'm breeding leopard to leopard, and I've, definitely isolated the gene and I'm breeding for specific things, the leopard pieds I'm producing now tend to have a lot of black outline. On a typical pied where you have orange outline, they have more black outline. I have one that literally has just a black spot the size of a $50. I mean, pure black on the animal. And unless it's come from one of my super leopards, well, so far my only super leopard, but I believe I have a few more here, I won't even guarantee those animals to be leopards because it's so difficult to see it in the pied. And that's one of the things that I try and do is be totally upfront with people that are getting into the project. Say, hey, I can guarantee this came from a homozygous leopard. I can guarantee you that this is a leopard pied. But over here, I can't. Now, once you throw the pastel into it, I could definitely pick it out because it does something really funky to the head pattern. All of the pastel leopard pieds have this really aberrant head pattern, and the pastel changes the color a little bit to almost this greenish-yellow color on the animal. So that can be picked out. But by themselves, the leopard pieds are still really, really hard to pick out. And unfortunately, the majority of the animals I'm producing, I don't know if it is genetic or just hitting the odds, are extremely high white, which makes it even harder to tell. I've just produced, out of 2 clutches, a group of possible spider leopard pieds and spider cinnamon leopard pieds and a possible cinnamon leopard pied, and all they have is partial facial markings on all of these animals. So I can't guarantee that they have the leopard or the spider in them. When I saw just head markings on the first clutch that came from the spider, I thought, well, these are definitely spiders. But then I produced a cinnamon possible leopard pied, and it had even less head marking on it than the ones that came from the spider clutch. So maybe the cinnamon leopard pied is reducing the pattern on the head like the spider does. So I could definitely see there's cinnamon in these animals. I can definitely see they're pied, but I can't see whether or not there's spider or leopard in those because they just don't have enough pattern.
So what else you got going over there, BP-wise, in your collection?
Just like, well, it seems like just like everybody else, we got into the bananas this year. So we've got a male over here that's breeding pretty strong. And naturally, I'm trying to get that into a bunch of leopard crosses because I really liked what John from Albinos Unlimited did with the banana spider leopard. I'm working, we've produced with the leopard crosses a lot more different crosses. We've got this year, I was real happy. It'll be next year before we do anything with it, but I hit a really good clutch of 1.4 super pastel leopards double head axanthic pied. So that's going to be a leopard lightning super pastel pied. Is going to be an incredible looking animal. So, like I said, we'll see what goes on with that, and then we've got the leopard fireflies that we're going to start breeding into the vanillas and see what we get out of the some leopard screams and some things like that. Some really cool stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd like to see that myself. I'm a big fan of those vanilla creams, but just imagine what the leopard gene will do to the pattern.
Yeah, it's really made the pattern really aberrant in the fire. We haven't got it into the vanilla yet, but we've got a lot of that stuff to work with as well.
All right. Well, you've also got the albino alligator project. That's got to be probably one of the coolest projects ever, I have to admit.
That is my favorite of all time. I mean, I've got these big white dragons out here. We've got 6 of them here right now. And last year we did get 16 infertile eggs. The female was her first breeding season. She was only 7 years old, which, unlike ball pythons, that's fairly young for a crocodilian. So we're hoping, I know Sean Hefleck is on his 3rd breeding season, but his first year, the female laid an infertile clutch as well. So we're hoping this 2013, I was born on Friday the 13th, so I'm hoping this might be our year with the albino alligators. We've actually got 2 breeding pairs right now. So hopefully we get some albino alligators. That's a project that if I never produce any, the animals I've got here are just something I enjoy. I kind of relax with them, go out, feed them. They're just really impressive animals, and they've got a little more intelligence. They can be conditioned to come when you call them and sit in certain places and be handled. And unlike the snakes that pretty much just tolerate you, these guys actually have a personality. And if I had to get rid of everything and just keep one animal, it would be one of those albinos.
Man, I just always told the wife if we lived in a warmer climate and had a pond, I would love to have an alligator out there. That'd be just so cool. Personally,
I'll tell you what, if the permitting works, I'm planning on working a pretty good program that'll allow you to have a hatchling, and when it outgrows its aquarium, we'll do a trade-out service where you send me the larger animal, I'll send you another small one.
Oh, that'd be neat.
That'll
so
work.
Are they aggressive starting out as hatchlings?
Alligators are just one of the most docile crocodilians. At the same time, I'm not promoting people run out and have crocodilians as pets, because if an alligator has a bad day, you're missing a digit or an arm. But with that said, when they're handled and when they're worked with, if they're touched around the face, they can be desensitized, and it's kind of like having a hairless pit bull. If he does have a bad day, it's going to be bad for you. But, if you're willing to take that risk and you're only keeping these animals till they're 2 or 3 feet, I probably once a month have to pry my son's finger out of the mouth of something, because he just likes to get bit. I think he thinks it's funny. But the last time I went out there, he had about a 2.5-foot alligator that had latched onto his index finger, and he was out of hands. He had it by the neck, right around the neck area, and had the tail pinched between his legs, and his other finger was stuck in there, and he couldn't do anything till I came out, because if he put the alligator down, it might roll.
So when you say desensitize around their face, like you can touch them and they won't snap in a response?
Yes. Now, I have, you can definitely do that with alligators. I've also done it with a Nile crocodile. And I would venture to say if you spend enough time, you could probably do it with any species. The one thing that's really difficult is to desensitize the inside of their mouth. And there are some individuals in Thailand that actually do that with some Siamese saltwater crosses, where they actually have the crocodile open his mouth and rub his tongue. Now, I also have a picture of a crocodile laying there with a hand up to the elbow sticking out of his mouth. Because that didn't work. I would never recommend touching the inside of a crocodilian's mouth. But when their mouth is closed, we rub them all when they're little. When if they do bite you, it's really not going to do anything. We rub them around the snout, and it desensitizes them to the point where they don't see it as a threat and they don't see it as a food source. And it's basically like keeping 25 alligators together. Eventually, they quit biting each other. But if you took 25 2-foot alligators from the wild and put them in a pond, every time they bumped into each other, they would bite, because it feels like some type of food, or it feels like something that's going to hurt them. So, just like any other animal, once the animal doesn't see you as a food source and doesn't see you as a threat, there's a really good chance that you can touch them around the snout and not be bit. But again, this is not something that I advocate people do. go out, get a pet alligator, and rub him around the snout. I mean, just like any of the, we rank our reptiles or our wildlife in Florida as class 1, 2, and 3, and class 1 are the lions and tigers and crocodiles and that type of stuff. And with any of those animals, you always have to be cautious, and you always have to worry about what they're doing, because if one of those animals does snap, and when I say snap, I don't think they go crazy. I think there's a behavior that has set them off. Something has startled them, or you've done something that you don't even realize that causes that animal to become defensive. Our bodies just can't handle, when you look at a gator pond and two gators get ticked off at each other and one bites the other one, they've got all this massive armor that protects them. When they do that to us, it can very quickly become a lethal bite.
So what kind of pound of pressure do the jaws apply?
I don't off the top of my head know what the exact pounds per square inch is. I know it's much more than a T-Rex, and I know from the studies they've done, the American alligator, I think, holds the record in that pounds per square inch, and it makes sense because of the really round, thick snout, where your crocodiles have more of a narrow snout. The alligators are designed to crush up turtles and crustaceans, clams, and things like that, so they've got a stouter snout for crushing that stuff off, where your crocodiles kind of tear and death roll and tear chunks off. Crocodiles definitely, at the same length, have much larger teeth than alligators do for gripping that large prey and getting in there. So, when people see these documentaries of saltwater crocodiles and Nile crocodiles taking these large predators into the water, they kind of think the same way about alligators. But when we do gut content studies, alligators typically have a lot of smaller meals. They eat more often, they eat smaller meals, almost kind of like a grazing animal on the bottom, eating clams and snails and crayfish and fish and turtles and things like that, which is typically why when we do have an alligator attack, the person typically ends up just losing an arm or a foot, a hand or a foot. That's a full meal for even a large alligator. They're not used to consuming large mammals and birds. However, if they find those in the water, they'll go after them because it's easy prey. But it's not something they're used to consuming. And most people don't actually die from the wounds inflicted by the alligator. They typically drown as the alligator's trying to tear a chunk off or just hold the prey until it stops moving so that it can do that. That's a totally different ballgame from a crocodile, which is used to jumping up and grabbing a zebra or a gazelle. Those animals, we're on the menu for those guys because we're just a snack.
So what's the average size on a male, female alligator?
Your females typically max out around 9 feet. There are a couple that have made it over 10. Your males anywhere from 10 to 13 feet, with record animals being slightly over 14.
Oh, so the males get bigger than the females then?
Yes, the males are quite a bit bigger than the females, and that all has to do with territory. And that's a big thing that we've looked at, other biologists have looked at in crocodilians, is that right now in Australia there have been, just recently, I think there have been 4 fatal attacks from saltwater crocodiles, and some of the people in the country are calling for a cull. For them to go out and hunt and knock down the number of these crocodiles. And one of the individuals over there with the Crocodile Specialist Group, Graham Webb, who's worked with crocodiles for years, did a study and basically explained to the government that what keeps the crocodile numbers in check are large crocodiles. When you remove a large crocodile out of an area, a number of smaller crocodiles move in to take his place. Now, when I say large crocodile, I'm talking, 12, 15, 20 feet. If you take him out of that area and 10-foot crocodiles move in, they're still a major threat to people. And now you have 10 times the threat that you have to worry about in the water. At the same time, if you take an area that is abundant with crocodiles and you basically cull that out so that there's just a few, you have a better chance of an attack, because now people come there and go, well, I don't see any crocodiles, and they get in the water. If you go to a site where you see 20 or 30 crocodiles laying on the bank or swimming in the water, you don't even attempt to swim at that point. So on one hand, by going in and clearing these out, it makes things more dangerous, and it allows more animals to show up in that area. We actually had that happen in down in Flamingo, the very tip of the Florida Everglades. There was a big male crocodile that had been there for 20-plus years, and in 2009, 2010, we had that bad freeze. He was one of the animals that passed away. And in that little inlet was him and a female. There was just the pair of them in there. And when he died, the last time I went down there, there were 8 crocodiles in that inlet, all about 8 or 9 feet that had taken, and he was well over 15 feet. So basically, you dealt with 2 crocodiles for 25 years, and then he's gone, and the next thing you know, you've got 8 crocodiles in that same area.
Mother Nature has a way of policing herself.
It does, and unfortunately, we don't like to not be in control. We want to be able to control everything, and sometimes we get in the way more than we actually help with the control. Sometimes the best thing we can do is just leave the situation alone and let Mother Nature, be the great equalizer.
So what is your outlook for the reptile industry? Like, what do you see in our future?
I think the reptile industry could be a sustainable industry for a very long time. I think people need to start getting together and realizing that if this is something you have a passion for, you need to get together now. You need to join some of the associations, keep up on what's going on. Politically, you're going to have to vote for the people that are kind of going to be on our side. Unfortunately, we're a minority. And the other thing we can do is just educate people as much as we can. I mean, one of the things that I've said for a long time is people fear what they don't understand. So I'm that way. If you can educate people about something, you could take that fear and turn it into respect. It doesn't mean they're going to love snakes or they're going to run out and they're going to buy a snake, but maybe they'll stop killing them. Maybe they'll think twice about the environment. Maybe they'll call a removal service to relocate that animal, or a local herp guy in their area to come relocate that animal. And by educating them and explaining to them that each of these animals has a purpose, I think that's just huge for us. We have to keep doing that, and we have to start with the kids. I mean, that's what's going to change. The older generations more than likely aren't going to change. Not that we shouldn't preach to them, but definitely with the kids. And that was definitely something that I saw in Australia that really amazed me. The people there were educated through their schools and through their government, and they have a sense of pride about their native wildlife, whether it's a crocodile or a kangaroo or a king brown snake. If it's a native animal to Australia, they've got a sense of pride about it. And unfortunately, we don't have that here. In the U.S., a lot of people, I think, are brought up to feel that, look, I bought this piece of property, and if there's some animal on it that's a nuisance, it needs to go. And basically, you moved into the snake's yard or the tortoise's yard or the alligator's yard. They didn't move into your yard. They were there long before you were. And I think we have to really educate our youth to get back to coinciding with wildlife and being safe. There's definitely nuisance animals that need to be removed, but we don't need to make them nuisance animals. We don't need to put food out for them. We don't need to do those types of things. And I think that's just something that we need to do in order to get more people on our side. And like I said, they fear what they don't understand. Just recently I went up in a small 2 or 4-seater airplane, and I don't know jack about flying. And when he said, hey, you want to fly it? I said, absolutely not. I want you to land it. I don't have a fear of flying. I have a fear of being in a really small airplane because I don't know anything about it. I've had a close family friend that died in a small aircraft, and I'm sure if I sat down and got into flying and learned about lift and engines and everything, I would be able to respect it and deal with it a little bit better, but I wasn't comfortable, so I understand the fear that people have about these things. I think we just need more education.
Which leads us into python hunters. Who came up with that?
A ton of production companies came up with that, and we kind of decided that we can either be, we can attempt to do this and try and educate people properly, or they're just going to go down the line until they find somebody that can. And unfortunately, this evening I've just received information that National Geographic is talking to some game hunters about doing a python hunting show. I mean, the only thing I can picture out of that is something similar to Rattlesnake Republic, which is just disgusting. And the fact that the pythons don't need to be there, they definitely don't belong in the Everglades. But, I think there's a lot of data that we can get from these pythons, and we're not going to get it from a bunch of game hunters that go out with bows and muzzle loaders and shotguns and just blow these things apart. I don't know, that's just never been my thing, and it seems like, unfortunately, I can't think of, since our show's gone off air, I can't think of a wildlife show that is actually educational. It seems like everything out there is a huge train wreck. They throw up more scare tactics and propagandas, and everybody wants you to think that every animal they deal with is the deadliest animal on the planet, and it's going to kill everybody. And, when you deal with wildlife, it wants to be left alone. 99% of the time, if you give any wild animal an out, it will flee before it will take a defensive posture. And I think most of these things that we label as attacks are not attacks. They're animals defending themselves. There are a few times where we are on the menu where, if you're walking along the Nile River, a crocodile will take you. That is an attack. But anytime I get bit or my son gets bit by an animal, it's not an attack. We're messing with the animal. That's a defensive mechanism for that animal. And an attack to me is offensive. If they're not looking at you as a prey item, then it's not an attack. And if you go down to the Everglades or anywhere else in the world and put your hands on a large python, you are going to get bit. And that's a defensive mechanism, not an attack.
That's really sad that they're going to cancel an educational show for some blood and gore just for some ratings and to scare people.
Well, and I think that's it. All three of us would love to continue on in this project or other projects, but they have to be projects that are going to be educational and are going to show the industry and the wildlife in a good light. We don't have anything like Steve Irwin anymore, who, as crazy as the guy was, did so much for conservation. He took millions of dollars and bought land in Australia for conservation purposes, which is still in his family's name, which will never be built on. And we don't have anything like that. All of the old, any of those guys, Jeff Corwin or Brady Barr, or Nigel Marvins, or whether you liked them or didn't, or you liked their personality or didn't, all of those were fairly educational shows. They were educated people. They weren't freaking out, running around screaming like the Turtle Man or any of these other crazy guys on Rattlesnake Republic or Swamp People. They were very educated people that tried to explain how the habitat worked and how these animals survived and what they did. And there's none of that on TV anymore. It's all a bunch of train wrecks and a bunch of guys running around chasing possums with no teeth.
So why don't you enlighten our listeners to what you were telling me earlier about the Python Challenge?
The Python Challenge, I think FWC is trying to let the civilian population know that they are doing everything they can to eradicate this invasive species, which should not be here. We really don't know what, if any, damage they've done to the ecosystem. We definitely know it's not near as bad as some other issues like feral cats and feral hogs, and even the plant life that's down there. All of that has been way more devastating than anything that the pythons have done. But Fish and Wildlife has, I think more than anything for publicity, tried to let people know that they're doing their best to get these animals out of there. And they have simply opened up a 1-month game season on pythons. And Fish and Wildlife only has access to their management lands. So unfortunately, this removal is not going to happen in the epicenter where the majority of the pythons are. It's on the outskirts, the water management lands and Fish and Wildlife managed lands that are on the outskirts of the epicenter of this. So the odds of them finding a large number of pythons is kind of slim. I took 60-day increments because this Python Challenge takes place halfway in January and halfway in February. I took the stats for the last previous years of both January and February, and in 2010 they removed 8 pythons out of those areas. In 2011 they removed 6, and that was with approximately 17 volunteers going out there. And then in 2012, with 50-plus volunteers, they removed 15. I've heard numbers now that there's anywhere between 400 and 1,000 people that applied to go out and hunt during this 30-day period. And most of those people are game hunters. So more than likely, up until this event, when the pythons did get open to game hunters in the last 3 years, I think the game hunters have only found 1 python. So if you don't have field experience with locating wild reptiles, it's going to be extremely difficult. It would be like somebody coming down to Central Florida here from New York and me telling them to go out in the woods and find the turkey or the deer. You probably need a guide for that, because if you're not familiar with the geographic range and how these animals move and what they do, you're never going to find them out there. And it's the same with the pythons. So unfortunately, Fish and Wildlife is trying to do the right thing, but a lot of times it keeps digging this back up, and it gives individuals, a chance to get on their high horse, any of the animal rights people, and basically come down on our industry for something that, whether it's released animals, escaped animals, or storm damage that put those animals there, fact of the matter is they're there because of the pet industry. And because of that, we're doing our best to come up with proper regulations, and that's what I advocate for, is proper regulations so that people that are doing things right legally can own these animals, even though they have to go through some hoops and some regulations that could prevent anything like this happening in the future. And that's one of the organizations. I'm right now the president of the Florida Reptile and Amphibian Association. And our goal is to set up a group that will work alongside Florida Fish and Wildlife in regulations and trainings and those type of things. And hopefully we can put experts on the panel in those specific fields, so we just don't have a bunch of people that are deciding to make rules about crocodilians or venomous snakes or pythons that don't have any specialty in that area.
What was Fish and Wildlife's initial numbers they came out with? It was something like 100,000?
The initial estimate that Fish and Wildlife came out with was somewhere between 3,000 to 117,000. And naturally, the first newspaper said, well, hell, I can bump that up to 150, from 117 to 150,000. And one of the last articles I've read said estimated 250,000 out there. And, estimations are really a joke. When you talk to any biologist about any group of animals, unless it's small enough that they can actually physically count what's out there, estimations are kind of a joke. We don't know how many indigo snakes there are in the state of Florida, or how many gopher tortoises there are, even though they're on the endangered species list. The biologist can tell you, in this geographic area, we have a decent number of them, or we have none in this area, or none have been located. But to actually give you a number, they just don't know. And that's one of the frustrating things, is the papers just want to shock and awe. So the biggest number they can get, if somebody says it, they're going to run with that.
He said it, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly, as soon as, the biologist says this, then the paper, and they always tack on a little bit more because they can get away with that. And the other thing, too, is it's an estimate. So anybody can come up with an estimate. A reporter could go out there and come up with an estimate. But, that's exactly what it is. And I think, as a group, as individuals, I think people are very smart when you sit them down and explain it to them. But as a group, they just kind of hear the headlines and they just go back and puke that up. And everybody likes to have a really great story to tell, so everybody elaborates a little bit more and exaggerates the story. And, the 8-foot python turns into a 10-foot python, and 3 stories down the line, it's 20 feet. I've already heard of a report from this Python Challenge of an 11-foot python weighing over 120 pounds. I'm floored at that because an 11-foot python probably doesn't weigh much more than 40 or 50 pounds, especially a wild one. So the numbers that people are throwing out, they're fish stories. That's exactly what they are. Everything is always bigger, and I can't tell you how many rattlesnakes I've heard about in Florida that is big around to somebody's waist, and I've yet to find a rattlesnake I can't put my hand around.
So do you guys vend any shows as of late?
As far as reptile shows?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we were up at the Canadian Reptile Breeders Expo, and Daytona. We're always there. That's the one show that's in our backyard, so we have to do that. And lately, I've been attending some of the Repticon shows, and just hanging out, and I've had some animals there on consignment. But those smaller shows are really hard for us to justify the cost in doing. Especially since most of our animals are sold over the internet or just from repeat customers that know who we are. So I'd love to. And now it's almost to the point where I like going to those shows and just hanging out. I don't have to work at the shows. I get to go around and talk to people and look at things other than ball pythons. Especially a lot of the native colubrids. In Florida we have a lot of colubrids that are geographically specific to their color and pattern, and it's nice to see people working on that. And I went through about a 15-year period where if it was a ball python, I didn't pay attention to it, but now that I'm working on some conservation projects with eastern indigo snakes and other native Floridian snakes, it allows me a chance to kind of walk around and see the rest of what's out there in the reptile world.
Well, it's plain as day that you are a man of actions. What would you tell someone that wants to do something but thinks that it won't make a difference or they can't do it? What would you tell that person?
Well, a lot of it would depend on exactly what they want to do. I mean, first of all, you've got to educate yourself, and then you've got to educate those around you, and surround yourself with people that can give you that knowledge. Whether it's breeding ball pythons or working on a conservation project, you just want to be a sponge and soak up as much as you can. And, don't take everything at face value. You've got to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that know what they're talking about, and they're just not blowing smoke. You've got a lot of people that if you both don't know anything, they're real good at BSing you and making it sound like they're an expert. So just do your homework, whether it's getting a new ball python or any other animal. Educate yourself. We've got too many impulse buyers out there. Got too many people at a show running around with a snake in their hand going, I got to buy a cage. And I go, well, you did that backwards. Buy the cage, buy the setup, find out what the animal needs, and then go get the animal. You shouldn't be running around with an animal looking for an enclosure. You should be running around with an enclosure looking for an animal. So I think it's just to really educate yourself about what you're doing and then start educating others.
Good answer. So what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
I've got my phone is listed. Right now the website's being worked on, so my actual website's down, but they can check me out on Facebook. I've got a personal site that I think only holds 5,000 people. So once we get beyond that, we go over to the Graziani Reptiles page. People can go over to Facebook at Graziani Reptiles and like us over there. That's where I keep, I post photographs of what's going on here at the facility, breeding photos, and all that kind of stuff. On the personal page, I don't do a whole lot. I use that kind of to peruse through see what everybody else is doing on there. But, the website, GrazianiReptiles.com, should be back up and running within the next week. And, like I said, my phone numbers and emails are all listed on those sites, and those are probably the best ways to contact me.
Awesome. You made my work a little harder because I didn't have a website to go off of and do some research, but you're a pretty guy to look up some.
Well, I'll tell you what, you need to get Mark Mandick on the show, and you can give him a hard time. He's my webmaster, and he was traveling around the world for the last month. So when he gets back, we're going to get together and get that thing up. And he's a great guy. He does a great job on my site, and one of the top breeders in Canada up there. So you'll have to get him on the show. He's got a lot of information for people.
Actually got to get him back on the show because unfortunately when we recorded, it sounded like I was a robot the whole time. So that was horrible. So again, Mark, I'm sorry about that. We're definitely going to get you on for round 2.
Good deal.
So is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think that's good. I think we've pretty much covered the gamut. I could talk for hours on any one of those individual topics, but I think we got a lot of good starter information out there, and I'd be happy to come back some other time and maybe specialize in a specific topic.
Awesome, man. We're going to hold that to you. All right, well, we really thank you. Appreciate you coming out and taking time out of your busy schedule. We know you are a busy guy. We appreciate it.
You got it. Anything for the industry.
All right, man. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Make sure to check out Greg on Facebook and also on GrazianiReptiles.com. Remember to check out our forum and register, and that's going to do it. Herper Pere, out.
Hey, everybody. It's Ralph Davis from Ralph Davis Reptiles. You're listening to Jason Rossi of Herper Pere. Ralph Davis, out.